Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Home Group, or well, depending on where you're listening from, Home Group probably. If you're listening to us via our podcast, Core Radio, or one of the other radio stations that we broadcast on, just want to welcome you so much to this review, the summary of what we've been talking about this past Sunday, which was a very fun subject, the subject of rejection. Jesus said at the end of Mark to go out and share the gospel with all the world. But a part of that is being rejected because Jesus was rejected, will be rejected. And we talked one time in particular where Jesus was rejected, which is in his own hometown. Jesus, being fully God and fully man, was there sharing with them the message that he was the Messiah, that he was Christ. And this is what he said to them. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." Then he sat down and gave back to the attendant the scroll, and the eyes were in the synagogue were fixed on him, and he began to say to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." So basically he is saying, hey, I am the Messiah. I am the Christ. And they're struggling with that because he grew up with them. They knew his human side, but Jesus had to be fully God and fully man in order to die on that cross and rise again. And so that was very difficult for them to understand that. And Jesus, being fully God, he didn't just see their faces, he didn't just hear their words, he saw their hearts. And he knew in their hearts that they were really struggling with this and rejecting him. And he says, a prophet is never accepted in his own hometown. And that was hard for them to hear. And Jesus also, you got to remember that Jesus is fully God and fully man. So all of the prophets that God had sent to Israel, and Israel had rejected them over and over and over again. Jesus knew that because he was God. He was with God in the beginning and from the beginning. And so Jesus knew exactly where this was going. Israel had a bit of a reputation when it came to rejecting the prophets. And so then Jesus says this to them, "Surely I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. But I tell you, truly, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, and there was a great famine throughout the land. But none of them was with Elijah except the widow in Sidon." And what people don't understand is that this woman was a Gentile, which was kind of a slam to them because the Jews believed that they were the chosen people of God, which is true. But the Gentiles were kind of thought of as just like these sinful, dark people, and some of them really were. But God was basically saying, if you won't accept me, then God is going to send me somewhere where I'm going to be accepted, which we knew that would be the Jews and the Gentiles. He shares another example of Naaman, and I believe it was the prophet Elisha, with him being healed of leprosy. One of the only people in the Bible ever healed of leprosy. Well, Naaman was a Gentile. So they got really upset with him because he was really kind of putting them down, saying, hey, listen, God used these prophets to speak to Gentiles because you Jews weren't willing to hear the message. Wow, that's kind of tough. So they got really mad at him, and they took him to a cliff, and they were going to push him down and stone him. And that's what they did back then when they stoned people. They took him to the cliffs, and they shut him down, and they pushed him down, and people would die. But Jesus just walked right on through. And not only that, just a few verses later, which is, I believe some scholars say that day or early the next, Jesus just cast out a demon. So this didn't affect Jesus. He was rejected by his own people, but it didn't affect him. He just walked right on through them and continued to do what he was going to do, which was go to the cross for you and for me and fulfill them what God had for them in their lives. Have you ever felt that way? Because, see, for us, preaching the gospel is living the gospel. That's what it's all about. People can receive from our words, but I think they receive more from our actions. So when you're out there living the gospel, you've got to accept some rejection. It's going to happen. But I would encourage you not to be held back by that. All right? I want to encourage you to keep living for Christ and being that light in this dark world. Hey, if you got a couple minutes, some of you guys will be discussing this in your home group. Excuse me, for the rest of the night. Some of you guys just touching on it because you got a Bible study that you're doing. If you listen to this on a podcast or a message on the radio, I've got some homework for you. I want you to think about maybe sometimes in your life when you felt rejected and how hard that was. And I want you to think about, hey, am I kind of uncomfortable? Am I pushing forward and doing what God has called me to do? Am I afraid to be rejected? Think about some of those things. And I want to encourage you to go on out there and keep on preaching the gospel by living the gospel. All right, Amy and I love you. Thank you so much for coming to Home Group at Church on the Rock and listening to our podcasts and radio stations. God bless you. Have a great week.